I never thought I would be the kind of person who goes through someone else's belongings, but desperation has a way of turning you into someone you don't recognize. The afternoon I found my mother's diary, the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains in her bedroom, casting pale yellow rectangles across the hardwood floor. The air smelled faintly of her lavender perfume mixed with the mustiness of old books and papers. My hands were trembling as I pulled open the drawer of her nightstand, the wood scraping softly against the frame. I had come home early from work that day. My boss had sent me away after noticing I couldn't focus, couldn't stop checking my phone, couldn't stop the tears that kept threatening to spill over. For 3 months, my mother had been treating me like a stranger in my own childhood home. Cold silences replaced our morning coffee chats. Accusatory glances followed me from room to room. She flinched when I tried to hug her. She locked her bedroom door at night. And I had no idea why. The diary was bound in soft brown leather, worn smooth at the edges from years of handling. It felt warm in my hands, almost alive. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it, the pages releasing a smell of ink and paper and secrets. The first entry I saw was dated just 2 weeks ago. My mother's handwriting, usually so neat and controlled, looked jagged and urgent. She stole from me again today. I counted the money in my wallet this morning. $43. When I checked tonight, only $18 remained. $25 gone. She thinks I don't notice. She thinks I'm too old, too confused. But I see everything. I know what she's doing. She's trying to drain me dry before she puts me in a home. My own daughter. My own flesh and blood. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank onto the edge of her bed, the mattress sighing beneath my weight. The room suddenly felt too hot, too small. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick. I had never stolen a single dollar from my mother. Not once. Not ever. I flipped back through the pages, my fingers clumsy with shock and growing dread. Entry after entry detailed thefts I had never committed. Missing jewelry. Disappearing groceries. Moved furniture. Changed television settings. Each entry was written with such conviction, such certainty. She described conversations we had never had. She recounted arguments that had never happened. She wrote about me sneaking men into the house late at night, about finding empty wine bottles hidden in my closet, about catching me going through her financial documents. None of it was true. None of it had happened. But reading her words, seeing the fear and betrayal written in her own hand, I understood for the first time that she truly believed every single accusation. This wasn't anger. This wasn't punishment. This was something far worse. I sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, reading through months of entries. The diary went back almost a year. The early entries were normal. She wrote about her garden, about phone calls with her sister, about a new recipe she wanted to try. Then, slowly, the entries began to change. Small complaints at first. I had forgotten to buy milk even though she had asked me twice. Except I remembered that day clearly. She had never asked me. I had bought milk anyway because I noticed we were running low. The complaints grew larger, more frequent, more bizarre. She wrote about me rearranging her closet while she slept. She wrote about finding her wedding ring in the garbage disposal, certain I had put it there. She wrote about waking up to find all the pictures on the walls turned backward, and she knew it was me, it had to be me, because who else would do such a cruel thing? My throat felt tight. My eyes burned. I heard the front door open downstairs, heard my mother's footsteps in the hallway, heard her setting down her purse on the kitchen counter. I quickly put the diary back exactly as I had found it, closed the drawer, and slipped out of her room. My legs felt weak as I descended the stairs. She was standing at the kitchen sink, filling a glass with water. She didn't turn around when I entered. "Mom," I said softly. She stiffened. The water continued to run, overflowing the glass, splashing against the stainless steel. She turned off the faucet and finally looked at me. Her eyes, the same green eyes I had inherited, were cold and guarded. "I need to talk to you," I said. "I have nothing to say to you," she replied. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Please," I said. I took a step closer. She took a step back. The rejection stung like a slap. "Mom, I don't know what's happening, but I need you to know that I would never hurt you. I would never steal from you. I love you." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound, sharp and painful to hear. "Love," she repeated. "You love my house. You love my money. You love the idea of getting rid of me so you can have everything for yourself." "That's not true," I said. Tears were streaming down my face now. I didn't bother wiping them away. "Mom, please. Something is wrong. We need to see a doctor." Her face transformed. The coldness turned to rage. Her cheeks flushed red. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "There is nothing wrong with me," she hissed. "You would love that, wouldn't you? You would love for everyone to think I'm crazy, that I'm losing my mind. Then you could have me declared incompetent. Then you could take everything." She pushed past me and stormed up the stairs. I heard her bedroom door slam, heard the lock click into place. I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the familiar smells of home, coffee and cinnamon and the faint scent of the roses she kept in a vase on the windowsill, and I felt more lost than I had ever felt in my life. That night, I called my aunt, my mother's younger sister who lived 3 hours away in Pennsylvania. Patricia answered on the fourth ring, her voice warm and slightly breathless. "Sweetheart," she said. "What a nice surprise. How are you?" "I'm not okay," I said, and then I told her everything. The cold treatment. The diary. The accusations. The rage. Patricia listened without interrupting, and I could hear her breathing change, becoming heavier, more concerned. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Patricia said, "How long has this been going on?" "The coldness started about 3 months ago," I said. "But the diary entries go back almost a year." "Oh, honey," Patricia said softly. "I think your mother might have dementia." The word hung in the air between us. Dementia. I had thought it, of course. Reading the diary, seeing the false memories written with such conviction, I had known something was deeply wrong. But hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way that terrified me. "She needs to see a doctor," Patricia continued. "A neurologist. They can run tests, do brain scans. But getting her to agree to go will be the hard part." "She won't go," I said. "She thinks I'm trying to have her declared incompetent. She thinks I'm after her money." Patricia sighed. The sound was heavy with sadness. This is classic, she said. Dementia patients often become paranoid, especially about the people closest to them. The primary caregiver usually becomes the target of their suspicions and anger. It's heartbreaking, but it's common. What do I do? I asked. My voice cracked. I felt like a child again, desperate for guidance, for someone to tell me how to fix this. Let me come visit, Patricia said. Maybe she'll listen to me. Maybe if the suggestion comes from someone she doesn't see as a threat, she'll agree to see a doctor. I can drive up this weekend. Thank you, I whispered. That Friday evening, Patricia arrived just as the sun was setting. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, and the air had that particular coolness that comes with early autumn. I met her at the door, and she pulled me into a tight hug. She smelled like vanilla and something floral, and for a moment I let myself relax into her embrace. Where is she? Patricia asked quietly. In the living room, I said. Watching television. We found my mother sitting in her favorite armchair, a crocheted blanket across her lap. The television was playing some game show, the bright colors and enthusiastic voices filling the room. When she saw Patricia, her face lit up with genuine joy. Patty, she exclaimed, using the childhood nickname. What are you doing here? I came to see my favorite sister, Patricia said, smiling. She crossed the room and kissed my mother's cheek. My mother beamed, and I felt a sharp pang of jealousy mixed with relief. At least she was still capable of happiness, still capable of love, even if she couldn't seem to direct any of it toward me anymore. The three of us had dinner together that night. I had made pot roast, my mother's favorite, with carrots and potatoes that had simmered for hours until they were tender and infused with the rich, savory smell of beef and herbs. My mother ate with enthusiasm, laughing at Patricia's stories about her neighbors, asking questions about Patricia's husband and children. She acted as though I wasn't there. When I asked if she wanted more water, she didn't respond. When I offered her seconds, she looked right through me. Patricia noticed. I saw the concern flash across her face, saw her reach under the table to squeeze my hand. After dinner, while I cleaned up the dishes, Patricia and my mother sat together on the couch. I could hear their voices, low and comfortable, punctuated by my mother's occasional laughter. The sound of her laughing, something I hadn't heard in months, made my chest ache. I was drying the last plate when Patricia came into the kitchen. Her expression was troubled. I brought up the idea of a checkup, she said quietly. Just casually, mentioned that we're all getting older and should be more proactive about our health. I told her I just had a full physical and suggested she do the same. What did she say? I asked. She agreed, Patricia said, but then she looked toward the living room, her voice dropping even lower. But then she told me she's worried about you. She said you've been acting strange. Stealing from her. Lying to her. She asked me if I had noticed anything wrong with you. My stomach twisted. What did you say? I told her you seemed fine to me, Patricia said. I didn't want to argue with her or make her defensive. But sweetheart, she really believes these things. She's not making it up to be cruel. In her mind, these things really happened. I know, I said. I set down the dish towel. My hands were shaking again. So what do we do now? I'm going to call her doctor on Monday, Patricia said. I'll explain the situation. Maybe they can reach out to her directly, frame it as a routine checkup. In the meantime, I think you need to protect yourself. Protect myself? I repeated. Document everything, Patricia said. Keep a journal of your own. Write down what really happens each day. If she accuses you of something, write down the truth. If this gets worse, if she tries to take legal action or turn other family members against you, you'll need evidence. The thought hadn't even occurred to me. The idea that my own mother might try to take legal action against me, might try to convince others that I was abusing her or stealing from her, filled me with a cold dread. Patricia stayed through Sunday. Those 2 days were strange and painful. My mother was warm and affectionate with Patricia, cold and distant with me. On Saturday morning, I came downstairs to find them making pancakes together, the kitchen filled with the sweet smell of vanilla and butter. My mother was humming, something she used to do all the time but hadn't done in months. When I entered the room, the humming stopped. "Good morning," I said. My mother didn't respond. She flipped a pancake with more force than necessary, the spatula clanging against the griddle. "Good morning, sweetheart," Patricia said, her voice deliberately cheerful. "We're making your favorite, blueberry pancakes." We sat down to eat together, but the tension was suffocating. My mother spoke only to Patricia. She passed the syrup to Patricia. She asked Patricia about her plans for the day. I might as well have been invisible. After breakfast, Patricia suggested we all go for a walk. It was a beautiful morning, crisp and clear, with that particular quality of light that makes everything look sharp and defined. We walked through the neighborhood where I had grown up, past houses I had known my entire life. Mrs. Chen was working in her garden, and she waved at us. My mother waved back, smiling. Mr. Rodriguez was washing his car in his driveway, and my mother called out a greeting. She seemed so normal, so much like her old self, that for a moment I could almost convince myself that I had imagined everything. But then we passed the park where she used to take me when I was little. There was a bench under an old oak tree where we used to sit and feed the ducks. I mentioned it, said something about remembering those afternoons, and my mother's face hardened. "I never took you to feed the ducks," she said sharply. "You're thinking of someone else's mother." The words were like a knife. Patricia reached for my hand again, squeezed it tight. "Of course you did," Patricia said gently. "I was there sometimes. Remember? We would bring old bread, and the ducks would come right up to us." My mother frowned, confusion flickering across her face. Then she shook her head. "I don't remember that," she said, but her voice was less certain now. That evening, Patricia had to leave. She hugged me tight at the door, whispered that she would call the doctor first thing Monday morning, told me to stay strong. I watched her car disappear down the street, and I felt utterly alone. The next few weeks were a special kind of hell. My mother's doctor did call her, did convince her to come in for what he called a routine wellness check. I wasn't allowed to go with her. She took a taxi to the appointment, and when she came home, she went straight to her room without speaking to me. Later, the doctor called me. His voice was kind but serious. He explained that he had run some preliminary cognitive tests, and the results were concerning. He was referring her to a neurologist for more comprehensive testing, including brain imaging. He said it would take a few weeks to get an appointment. In the meantime, he said, try to be patient with her. I know this is difficult for you, but she's scared and confused. Her brain is betraying her, making her believe things that aren't true. It's not her fault, and it's not yours. I tried to be patient. I really did. But living with someone who hates you, who believes you're a thief and a liar, who looks at you with suspicion and fear, is exhausting in ways I can't fully describe. Every morning I woke up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Every interaction was fraught with tension. I started spending more time at work, staying late even when I didn't need to, just to avoid going home. I started keeping the journal Patricia had suggested. Every evening, I would sit in my room and write down what had actually happened that day. The truth felt important to record, even if no one but me would ever read it. October 15th. Mom accused me of throwing away her blue sweater. I did not throw away her blue sweater. I helped her look for it. We found it in her closet, exactly where it should be. She did not apologize. She said I must have put it back to cover my tracks. October 18th. Mom said I stole $60 from her purse. I have not touched her purse. I checked my own wallet in front of her to show her I only have $23. My last paycheck went to bills and groceries. She said I must have hidden the money somewhere else. October 22nd. Mom told Mrs. Chin from next door that I'm trying to poison her. Mrs. Chin called me, concerned. I had to explain that Mom is sick, that she's seeing a specialist. Mrs. Chin was kind, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. I don't blame her. If someone told me their daughter was poisoning them, I would be concerned too. The entries went on and on. Each one was a small heartbreak, a tiny erosion of the relationship we had once had. The neurology appointment finally came in early November. This time, I insisted on going with her. She protested, but I told her the doctor had requested that a family member be present. It was a lie, but a necessary one. The neurologist's office was in a medical building downtown. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and old magazines. We sat in uncomfortable chairs, not speaking. My mother flipped through a magazine without really looking at it. I watched the fish in the aquarium along the wall, their slow, peaceful movements, and tried to calm my racing heart. When we were finally called back, the neurologist was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a gentle manner. Dr. Patel, she introduced herself. She shook both our hands and gestured for us to sit. She spent over an hour with my mother, asking questions, having her perform various tasks. Remember these 3 words. Draw a clock showing 3:15. Count backward from 100 by sevens. My mother struggled with some of the tasks. I watched her frustration grow, watched her hands clench in her lap. Then came the brain scan. I waited in the lobby while my mother was taken back for an MRI. The minutes crawled by. I tried to read a magazine but couldn't focus on the words. I checked my phone obsessively, though I had no messages, no emails, nothing to distract me from my spiraling thoughts. When my mother finally emerged, she looked exhausted. We were told to wait for Dr. Patel to review the results. Another 40 minutes passed. Finally, we were called back into her office. Dr. Patel's expression was serious but compassionate. She had images pulled up on her computer screen, black and white pictures of my mother's brain. She pointed to certain areas, explained what she was seeing. Atrophy in the hippocampus. Reduced blood flow in certain regions. Protein deposits visible on the scan. Your mother has Alzheimer's disease, Dr. Patel said gently. Based on the cognitive testing and the imaging, I would say she's in a moderate stage. This explains the memory problems, the confusion, and the paranoia you've been experiencing. My mother stared at the doctor. I don't have Alzheimer's, she said. Her voice was shaking. I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. I understand this is difficult to hear, Dr. Patel said. But the evidence is clear. The good news is that we can start treatment. There are medications that can help slow the progression, help manage some of the symptoms. And there are support services available for both you and your daughter. I don't need medication, my mother said. She stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor. This is ridiculous. This is exactly what she wants. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. You put them up to this. You told them to say this. You want everyone to think I'm crazy. Mom, please, I said. I stood up too, reached for her arm. She jerked away from me. Don't touch me, she hissed. Dr. Patel remained calm. She had clearly dealt with this reaction before. Mrs. Harrison, she said. No one is trying to trick you. I'm showing you the results of objective medical tests. Your brain is changing in ways that are affecting your memory and your perception. This is a disease, not a character flaw. It's not your fault. But my mother was already heading for the door. I followed her out, apologizing to Dr. Patel over my shoulder. In the parking lot, my mother walked quickly toward the car, her purse clutched tight against her chest. I unlocked the doors and we both got in. The silence was suffocating. I started the engine but didn't put the car in gear. Instead, I turned to look at my mother. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw clenched, tears streaming down her face. Mom, I said softly. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this is happening to you. Take me home, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. I drove home carefully, my own vision blurred with tears. When we pulled into the driveway, my mother got out of the car without waiting for me and went straight into the house. I sat in the car for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process everything. Alzheimer's disease. The words felt too big, too terrible. I had known something was wrong, but having a name for it, having it confirmed by medical tests and brain scans, made it real in a way that was almost unbearable. This wasn't going to get better. This was only going to get worse. That evening, I called Patricia and told her the diagnosis. She cried. I cried. We talked about what came next. The medications. The support groups. The eventual need for more intensive care. It all felt overwhelming, impossible. Over the next few days, my mother retreated further into herself. She barely left her room. She refused to eat meals with me. I would leave food outside her door and come back later to find the plate empty, but I never saw her take it. I tried to give her space while also keeping an eye on her. I was terrified she would try to leave, would wander off and get lost. I had read about Alzheimer's patients doing that, walking out of their homes and disappearing, sometimes found miles away with no memory of how they got there. On the fourth day after the diagnosis, I came home from work to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table. She had papers spread out in front of her. Financial documents. Bank statements. The deed to the house. My heart sank. What are you doing? I asked carefully. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red and swollen, like she had been crying for hours. I'm protecting myself, she said. I'm making sure you can't steal from me anymore. Mom, I haven't stolen anything from you, I said. I kept my voice calm, even though I wanted to scream. Please. You're sick. The doctor explained it. Your brain is making you believe things that aren't true. Stop lying to me, she shouted. She stood up so quickly her chair fell backward, clattering against the floor. I know what you've been doing. I have proof. I've been writing it all down. I know, I said quietly. I found your diary. Her face went pale, then red. You went through my things, she said. Her voice was shaking with rage. You invaded my privacy. You had no right. I was desperate, I said. You wouldn't talk to me. You wouldn't tell me what I had done wrong. I needed to understand. Get out, she said. What? Get out of my house, she said. Her voice was cold now, hard. I want you gone. Pack your things and leave. Mom, this is my home too, I said. I've lived here for 32 years. I moved back after Dad died to take care of you. I'm not leaving you alone when you're sick. I don't need you to take care of me, she said. I'm fine. And this is my house. My name is on the deed. I want you out. I felt like the floor was dropping out from under me. Where am I supposed to go? I asked. I don't care, she said. Go to a hotel. Go to a friend's house. Just get out. I stood there, frozen, unable to process what was happening. My mother picked up her phone. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police, she said. I'll tell them you're trespassing. I'll tell them you've been stealing from me. The threat was clear. And I knew that in her current state, she would absolutely follow through. I could try to explain to the police about her diagnosis, but it would be humiliating and traumatic for both of us. And there was no guarantee they would believe me over her. Okay, I said. My voice sounded strange, distant. I'll go. But I'm not abandoning you. I'll check on you. I'll make sure you're okay. Don't bother, she said. I went upstairs and packed a bag with shaking hands. Clothes. Toiletries. My laptop. My journal. I moved through my childhood bedroom like a ghost, touching familiar objects, trying to memorize the feeling of being home because I didn't know when or if I would be allowed back. When I came back downstairs with my bag, my mother was still in the kitchen. She didn't look at me as I walked past. I paused at the door, turned back. I love you, Mom, I said. She didn't respond. I drove to a hotel near my office, checked in, and sat on the edge of the bed in a room that smelled like cleaning products and stale air conditioning. The silence was deafening. I called Patricia, told her what had happened. She was furious. She can't just kick you out, Patricia said. That's your home. It's her house, I said. Legally, she can do whatever she wants. But she's not competent to make these decisions, Patricia argued. We need to get guardianship. We need to protect her from herself. The thought of going to court, of having my mother declared incompetent, of taking away her autonomy, made me feel sick. I know, I said. But I can't do that to her right now. She's already so scared and angry. If I try to take control of her life, it will destroy whatever relationship we have left. What relationship? Patricia asked gently. Sweetheart, she kicked you out. She thinks you're a thief. She hates you. The words hurt because they were true. But she's still my mother, I said. And somewhere inside, underneath the disease, she's still the woman who raised me. I have to believe that. Patricia sighed. Okay, she said. But I'm coming up this weekend. We need to figure out a plan. She can't live alone, not with Alzheimer's. It's not safe. I know, I said. That night, I barely slept. The hotel bed was too soft, the room too quiet and too loud at the same time. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, twisted with anger and fear. I thought about her alone in the house, and I worried. What if she fell? What if she forgot to turn off the stove? What if she wandered outside and got lost? The next morning, I drove past the house on my way to work. My mother's car was in the driveway. The curtains were drawn. Everything looked normal from the outside, but I knew the truth. Inside that house, my mother was living in a reality that didn't exist, fighting enemies that weren't real, protecting herself from threats that were only in her mind. I called her several times that day. She didn't answer. I sent text messages. No response. By evening, I was frantic with worry. I drove to the house and knocked on the door. No answer. I used my key to let myself in, calling out as I entered. Mom? It's me. I'm just checking to make sure you're okay. I found her in the living room, sitting in her chair, staring at the television. She didn't acknowledge my presence. Mom, I said. Did you eat today? Silence. I went to the kitchen. The refrigerator was full of food I had bought before being kicked out. Nothing looked touched. I made a sandwich, poured a glass of milk, and brought it to her. I set it on the side table next to her chair. Please eat something, I said. She still didn't look at me, but after a moment, she picked up the sandwich and took a small bite. Relief flooded through me. I'm going to go now, I said. But I'll come back tomorrow to check on you. Please call me if you need anything. I left before she could tell me to get out again. This became my routine. Every day, I would stop by the house. Sometimes in the morning before work, sometimes in the evening after. I would make sure she had eaten, make sure the house was safe, make sure she was okay. Sometimes she ignored me. Sometimes she yelled at me. Once, she threw a book at me. It hit the wall next to my head with a loud thud, and I left quickly, my heart pounding. Patricia came that weekend as promised. She tried to talk to my mother about getting help, about maybe moving to an assisted living facility where she would have support and care. My mother refused to even discuss it. I'm not going to one of those places, she said. Those places are where people go to die. I'm staying in my own home. But you need help, Patricia said gently. You can't live alone safely anymore. I'm fine, my mother insisted. I don't need help. I just need people to stop trying to control me. After Patricia left, I felt more hopeless than ever. We were stuck. My mother refused treatment, refused help, refused to acknowledge that anything was wrong. And legally, there was nothing I could do unless she became an immediate danger to herself or others. November turned into December. The weather grew colder. I continued my daily visits, continued to be met with hostility or silence. The hotel room became my new normal, though it never felt like home. I was living out of a suitcase, eating takeout, spending my evenings alone watching television or reading, trying not to think about how my life had fallen apart. Then, 2 weeks before Christmas, everything changed. I got a call at work from Mrs. Chen, our neighbor. Her voice was worried. I think you should come home, she said. Your mother is in her front yard in her nightgown. It's 30 degrees outside and she's not wearing shoes. I tried to get her to come inside, but she won't listen to me. She keeps saying she's waiting for someone. I'll be right there, I said. I drove home faster than I should have, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. When I pulled up to the house, I saw my mother standing on the front lawn. She was wearing a thin cotton nightgown, her feet bare on the frozen grass. Her arms were wrapped around herself, and she was shivering violently. Mrs. Chen was standing nearby, holding a blanket, looking helpless. I jumped out of the car and ran to my mother. Mom, I said. What are you doing out here? You're freezing. She looked at me, and for a moment, her eyes were confused, unfocused. Then they cleared slightly. I'm waiting for your father, she said. He said he would pick me up at 7. He's late. My father had been dead for 5 years. Mom, I said gently. Dad's not coming. Let's go inside where it's warm. No, she said stubbornly. He'll be here. He promised. I looked at Mrs. Chen, who handed me the blanket. I wrapped it around my mother's shoulders. She didn't resist, but she didn't move toward the house either. Mom, please, I said. You're going to get sick. Come inside with me. We can wait for Dad inside where it's warm. She looked at me, really looked at me, and suddenly her face crumpled. Where is he? She asked, and her voice was small and lost, like a child's. Why isn't he here? My heart broke. I put my arm around her and guided her toward the house. She leaned against me, still shivering. Mrs. Chen opened the door for us, and I led my mother inside. The warmth of the house was a shock after the cold outside. I got my mother settled on the couch, piled more blankets on top of her, and made her hot tea. Her feet were red and cold. I rubbed them gently, trying to warm them up. She sat quietly, staring at nothing, tears running down her face. Thank you, Mrs. Chen, I said. I really appreciate you calling me. Of course, Mrs. Chen said. She looked at my mother with such sadness. If you need anything, I'm right next door. After she left, I sat with my mother. She sipped her tea slowly. The color was coming back to her face, but she still looked lost and confused. Do you remember what happened? I asked gently. She frowned. I was waiting for someone, she said. But I can't remember who. That's okay, I said. You're safe now. That's what matters. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for just a moment, I saw recognition in her eyes. Not the angry, suspicious recognition of the past few months, but something deeper. Something that remembered who I really was. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? I asked. I don't know, she said. But I feel like I should be sorry. I took her hand. It's okay, Mom, I said. Everything's okay. But it wasn't okay. That incident made it clear that my mother could no longer live alone. She was a danger to herself. I called Patricia, called Dr. Patel, called a social worker who specialized in elder care. We had a conference call where everyone agreed that my mother needed 24-hour supervision. The social worker explained my options. I could hire in-home care, which would be expensive but would allow my mother to stay in her house. Or I could move her to a memory care facility, which would provide specialized care but would mean leaving her home. Or I could move back in and care for her myself, though the social worker warned that this was often the most difficult option, both physically and emotionally. I can't afford in-home care, I said. Not long-term. And I don't think I can care for her alone. I work full-time, and she needs more help than I can provide. Then a memory care facility might be the best option, the social worker said. I can give you a list of good facilities in the area. You should visit them, see which one feels right. But I don't have the legal authority to move her, I said. She'll refuse. She'll fight me. Given the incident with her wandering outside in dangerous conditions, we can petition for emergency guardianship, the social worker explained. A judge can grant you temporary authority to make medical and living decisions for her. It's not ideal, but sometimes it's necessary to protect the person. The thought of going to court, of having a judge declare my mother incompetent, made me feel sick. But I didn't see another choice. She had almost frozen to death in her own front yard. What would happen next time? Would she turn on the stove and forget about it? Would she wander into traffic? I started the legal process. It was complicated and emotionally exhausting. I had to provide medical records, witness statements, documentation of her declining condition. I had to stand in front of a judge and explain why my mother couldn't make decisions for herself anymore. The judge was kind but thorough. He asked many questions. He reviewed all the evidence. And finally, he granted me temporary guardianship. Your mother is lucky to have you, he said. I know this isn't easy. But you're doing the right thing. I didn't feel like I was doing the right thing. I felt like I was betraying her. I visited 3 memory care facilities. They all smelled the same, like cleaning products and old age and sadness. But one of them, Meadowbrook, felt different. It was smaller, more home-like. The staff seemed genuinely caring. The residents looked content, or as content as people with dementia can look. There was a garden where residents could walk safely. There were activities, music therapy, art classes. The rooms were private and could be decorated with personal items. I signed the papers. I paid the deposit. I arranged for my mother to move in after the new year. Telling her was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I went to the house on a cold January morning. My mother was in the kitchen, trying to make coffee. She had forgotten how the coffee maker worked and was staring at it with frustration. Here, let me help, I said. She stepped back and let me make the coffee. We sat at the kitchen table together, the same table where we had shared thousands of meals over the years. The morning light came through the window, pale and weak. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Mom, I said. We need to talk about your living situation. Her face immediately became guarded. I'm not leaving my house, she said. You can't stay here alone, I said. It's not safe. You wandered outside in the cold. You could have died. That was one time, she said. It won't happen again. You don't remember it happening, I said gently. That's the problem. Your memory is getting worse. You need help, more help than I can give you while working full-time. So you're putting me in a home, she said. Her voice was bitter. This is what you've wanted all along. To get rid of me so you can have my house. That's not true, I said. I don't want your house. I want you to be safe and cared for. I found a really nice place. It's called Meadowbrook. They specialize in memory care. You'll have your own room, and there are activities and a garden, and the staff is wonderful. I'm not going, she said. I pulled out the guardianship papers. The judge gave me legal authority to make this decision, I said. I'm sorry, Mom. I know you're angry. I know you feel like I'm betraying you. But I'm doing this because I love you and I can't watch you hurt yourself. She stared at the papers, then at me. Her eyes filled with tears. You're taking everything from me, she said. My home. My independence. My dignity. I'm trying to keep you alive, I said. My own tears were falling now. I'm trying to make sure you're safe. I wish there was another way. I wish you weren't sick. But you are, and I have to do what's best for you, even if you hate me for it. She stood up and walked out of the room. I heard her bedroom door slam. The move happened a week later. Patricia came to help. We packed my mother's belongings, her clothes and photos and favorite books. We tried to make her new room at Meadowbrook feel like home. We hung pictures on the walls, put her favorite quilt on the bed, arranged her things on the dresser. My mother didn't speak to either of us during the entire process. She sat in a chair and watched us pack up her life with an expression of such profound sadness that I could barely stand to look at her. When everything was packed, we drove her to Meadowbrook. The staff greeted us warmly. They showed my mother to her room, explained the schedule, introduced her to some of the other residents. She remained silent through it all. When it was time for us to leave, I hugged her. She stood stiff and unresponsive in my arms. I'll visit you tomorrow, I said. I love you, Mom. She turned away without responding. Patricia and I drove back to the house in silence. When we got there, the emptiness was overwhelming. My mother's presence was everywhere and nowhere. Her coffee cup still sat on the kitchen counter. Her reading glasses were on the side table. But she was gone. I moved back into the house that night. It felt wrong, like I was an intruder. I couldn't sleep in my old room, so I slept on the couch. Every sound made me jump, expecting to hear my mother's footsteps, her voice. I visited her every day at Meadowbrook. Sometimes she was angry, accusing me of imprisoning her. Sometimes she was confused, asking when she could go home. Sometimes she didn't recognize me at all, asking the staff who the strange woman was who kept visiting. Those were the worst days, when she looked at me with no recognition in her eyes. When I was just another stranger in a world that was becoming increasingly strange to her. But there were good days too. Days when she seemed almost like her old self. We would sit in the garden together, and she would tell me stories about her childhood, about meeting my father, about the early days of their marriage. On those days, I could almost forget about the disease, almost pretend that everything was normal. One afternoon in late February, I arrived for my daily visit to find my mother sitting in the common room, working on a puzzle with one of the staff members. She looked up when I entered, and her face lit up with a smile. "There you are," she said. "I've been waiting for you." My heart lifted. "Hi, Mom," I said. I sat down next to her. "How are you today?" "I'm good," she said. She picked up a puzzle piece, studied it, and fit it into place. Then she turned to me, and her expression became serious. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay," I said. "I've been very unfair to you," she said. "I accused you of terrible things. I said awful things to you. And I'm sorry. I felt tears prick my eyes. Mom, you don't need to apologize. You were sick. You are sick. It wasn't your fault. But I hurt you, she said. I can see it in your eyes. Even now, you're sad. And it's because of me. I took her hand. I'm sad because I miss you, I said. I miss the way things used to be. But I don't blame you for any of it. I know it was the disease, not you. She squeezed my hand. You're a good daughter, she said. Better than I deserve. We sat together for a while, holding hands, not speaking. The moment felt precious and fragile, like something that could shatter at any second. And it did shatter, because the next day when I visited, she didn't know who I was again. She called me by her sister's name. She asked me where her daughter was, said she hadn't seen her in weeks. I played along, pretended to be Patricia, because it seemed kinder than insisting on the truth. The months passed. Winter turned to spring. My mother's condition continued to decline. She stopped recognizing anyone. She stopped speaking in complete sentences. She needed help with everything, eating, dressing, bathing. The vibrant, independent woman who had raised me was disappearing, replaced by someone who seemed to exist in a fog, unreachable. I kept visiting, even though she didn't know who I was. I would sit with her, hold her hand, tell her about my day. Sometimes she would smile at me, a vague, unfocused smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sometimes she would seem agitated, pulling away from me, calling out for people who weren't there. The staff at Meadowbrook was wonderful. They treated her with dignity and kindness. They made sure she was comfortable, that she was clean and fed and safe. But I could see the pity in their eyes when they looked at me. They had seen this story play out many times before. They knew how it ended. One evening in early June, I got a call from Meadowbrook. My mother had stopped eating. She was refusing food and water. The nurse explained that this was common in the late stages of Alzheimer's, that the body was beginning to shut down. How long? I asked. It's hard to say, the nurse said gently. Days, maybe a week. You should come. I drove to Meadowbrook through streets blurred by tears. When I got to my mother's room, she was lying in bed, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and labored. She looked so small, so fragile. I pulled a chair up next to her bed and took her hand. I'm here, Mom, I said. I'm right here. I don't know if she heard me. She didn't open her eyes, didn't squeeze my hand. But I stayed anyway. I stayed all night, holding her hand, talking to her, telling her all the things I wished I had said before the disease took her away from me. I told her about my favorite memories. The time she taught me to bake chocolate chip cookies and we ate half the dough before it even made it into the oven. The time she stayed up all night with me when I had the flu, putting cool cloths on my forehead and reading to me. The time she drove 3 hours in a snowstorm to pick me up from college when my car broke down. All the little moments that made up a lifetime of love. I told her I forgave her for the accusations, for the anger, for pushing me away. I told her I understood that it wasn't really her, that the disease had stolen her from me long before her body would follow. And I told her it was okay to let go. That I would be okay. That she had been a wonderful mother, and I was grateful for every moment we had together, even the painful ones at the end. Patricia arrived the next morning. She sat on the other side of the bed, and we kept vigil together. We took turns holding my mother's hand, talking to her, singing the old songs she used to sing to us when we were children. My mother died just after sunset on the third day. Her breathing simply stopped, so quietly that at first I didn't realize it had happened. The room was filled with golden light from the setting sun, and there was a peacefulness to the moment that felt like a gift. The nurse came in, checked for a pulse, and nodded gently. "She's gone," she said. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Patricia and I sat with her for a while longer. We weren't ready to leave, weren't ready to let her go. Finally, a staff member came in and gently suggested that we might want to say our final goodbyes. We each kissed her forehead, told her we loved her one last time, and left. The funeral was small. Just family and a few close friends. We buried her next to my father, just as she had always wanted. The day was warm and sunny, with a gentle breeze that rustled the leaves of the trees in the cemetery. Birds sang in the branches above us. It was the kind of day my mother would have loved. After the funeral, I went back to the house. Patricia offered to stay with me, but I told her I needed to be alone. I walked through the rooms, touching things, remembering. The house felt empty without her, but it also felt peaceful. The tension that had filled it for so long was gone. I found myself in her bedroom. I opened the drawer of her nightstand and pulled out the diary. I sat on her bed and read through it again, all the accusations, all the fear and confusion and anger. But this time, I could read it with compassion instead of hurt. This time, I understood that these words weren't really about me. They were about a woman losing her grip on reality, trying desperately to make sense of a world that was becoming increasingly incomprehensible. On the last page, there was an entry I hadn't seen before. It was dated just a few days before I had found the diary, before everything had fallen apart. "I'm scared. I know something is wrong with me. I forget things. I lose things. I can't trust my own mind anymore. I look at my daughter and sometimes I don't recognize her. Sometimes I think she's a stranger who's trying to hurt me. But then I'll have a moment of clarity, and I'll remember that she's my baby girl, and I love her more than anything in the world. I'm so scared of what's happening to me. I'm so scared of losing myself. I'm so scared of losing her." I read those words over and over, tears streaming down my face. She had known. On some level, she had known what was happening to her. And she had been terrified. I closed the diary and held it against my chest. I wished I had found this entry earlier. I wished I had known that somewhere inside, she was still fighting, still aware, still scared. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. Maybe the outcome would have been the same. But at least I would have known that the mother I loved was still in there, trapped inside a failing mind, watching helplessly as the disease destroyed everything. I kept the diary. I put it in a box with other mementos, photos, and letters and small treasures. Someday, I thought, I might be able to look at it without crying. Someday, I might be able to remember the good times without the shadow of those final terrible months. But for now, I let myself grieve. I grieved for my mother, for the woman she had been and the woman the disease had turned her into. I grieved for the relationship we had lost, for all the conversations we would never have, for all the moments that had been stolen from us. And slowly, very slowly, I began to heal. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in grief and caregiver trauma. She helped me understand that what I had been through was a kind of prolonged loss, watching someone die by inches, losing them piece by piece long before their body gave out. She helped me work through the guilt I felt, the constant questioning of whether I had made the right decisions, whether I could have done more, whether I should have fought harder to keep her at home. She reminded me that I had done the best I could with an impossible situation. That there were no perfect answers when dealing with Alzheimer's. That loving someone sometimes means making decisions they hate, decisions that feel like betrayal, because those decisions are what will keep them safe. I joined a support group for people who had lost loved ones to Alzheimer's. Sitting in a circle with others who understood, who had lived through similar nightmares, was incredibly healing. We shared our stories, our guilt, our grief, our small moments of grace. We cried together. We laughed together, sharing the dark humor that comes from surviving something terrible. One woman in the group, Margaret, had lost her husband to Alzheimer's 5 years earlier. She told me something that stuck with me. The disease took him from me long before he died, she said. But I had to learn to grieve the man I lost while still caring for the shell he left behind. It's the cruelest thing, loving someone who doesn't know you anymore. But we do it anyway, because that's what love is. Summer turned to fall. I started going through my mother's things, deciding what to keep and what to donate. It was painful but also cathartic. Each item held a memory. Her favorite sweater, soft and worn. Her collection of teacups, each one from a different place she had visited. Her recipe box, filled with cards in her neat handwriting, some of them stained with ingredients from years of use. I kept the recipes. I started cooking her dishes, and with each one, I felt a little closer to her. The smell of her pot roast filling the kitchen brought back Sunday dinners. The taste of her chocolate cake reminded me of birthdays and celebrations. Food became a way to remember her as she had been, before the disease. I also found letters she had written to me over the years. Letters from when I was away at college, full of news from home and encouragement for my studies. Letters from when I got my first job, telling me how proud she was. Letters from after my father died, when we were both grieving and trying to figure out how to move forward. Reading those letters, I was reminded of who she really was. Not the angry, paranoid woman of her final years, but the loving, supportive mother who had always been my biggest cheerleader. That was the woman I needed to remember. That was the woman I needed to honor. I started volunteering with the Alzheimer's Association. I wanted to do something meaningful with my experience, to help others who were going through what I had gone through. I spoke at support groups, sharing my story, offering hope and understanding. I participated in fundraising walks, raising money for research and support services. It felt good to turn my pain into something positive, to help others navigate the impossible journey of watching someone they love disappear. 1 year after my mother's death, I organized a memorial event. I invited family and friends to the house for an afternoon of remembering. People brought photos and stories. We laughed and cried together. We celebrated the woman my mother had been, the lives she had touched, the love she had given. Patricia pulled me aside at one point. "Your mother would be so proud of you," she said. "The way you cared for her, even when it was hard. Even when she pushed you away. You never gave up on her." "I tried," I said. "That's all I could do." "That's all any of us can do," Patricia said. And it was enough. It was more than enough. As the sun set that evening, I stood in the backyard, looking at the garden my mother had loved. It had grown wild in her absence, but there was beauty in the wildness. Roses climbed the fence, their blooms heavy and fragrant. Lavender swayed in the breeze, releasing its calming scent. Birds sang their evening songs. I thought about everything that had happened. The diary full of false accusations. The months of coldness and anger. The heartbreak of watching her disappear. The guilt of making decisions she hated. The relief when it was finally over, followed immediately by guilt for feeling relieved. It had been the hardest thing I had ever been through. But I had survived it. And in surviving it, I had learned things about love and loss and the complicated nature of caregiving. I had learned that you can love someone and still need to make decisions that hurt them. That you can be angry at a disease without being angry at the person who has it. That grief can start long before someone dies, and that's okay. I had learned that not everything is what it seems. My mother's accusations weren't really about me. They were symptoms of a disease that was destroying her brain, creating false memories and paranoid delusions. Understanding that didn't make it hurt less, but it did make it possible to forgive, to let go of the anger and hurt, to remember the love that had always been there underneath. As darkness fell, I went back inside. The house was quiet now, everyone had gone home. I walked through the rooms, turning off lights, and I felt my mother's presence everywhere. Not the confused, angry woman of her final years, but the strong, loving woman who had raised me. That was who she really was. That was who I would choose to remember. I went to bed that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The journey had been brutal, but I had made it through. My mother was at rest. And slowly, painfully, I was learning to be at rest too. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my window. I lay there for a moment, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood coming to life. A dog barking. A car starting. Children laughing as they walked to school. I got up and made coffee, using my mother's old coffee maker, the one she had struggled with in her final days at home. The familiar smell filled the kitchen, and I smiled. I poured a cup and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared so many meals, so many conversations. I thought about the future. The house was mine now, legally and emotionally. I could stay here, surrounded by memories. Or I could sell it, start fresh somewhere new. I didn't know yet what I would do. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had choices, like I had control over my own life again. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Thinking of you today. Love you. I smiled and texted back. Love you too. Thank you for everything. She had been my rock through all of this. When I was drowning, she had thrown me a lifeline. When I was lost, she had helped me find my way. I didn't know how I would have survived without her. I spent the day doing ordinary things. I went to the grocery store. I did laundry. I cleaned the house. These simple tasks felt almost revolutionary after the chaos of the past year. There was something deeply satisfying about having a normal day, a day not defined by crisis or grief or impossible decisions. That evening, I sat in the living room with a photo album. I looked through pictures of my mother from throughout her life. As a young woman, beautiful and full of hope. As a new mother, holding me with such tenderness. As a middle-aged woman, confident and strong. As a grandmother, though I had no children of my own, she had been a grandmother figure to my cousin's kids, and they had adored her. I found a picture of the two of us from just a few years before she got sick. We were at the beach, both of us laughing, the wind whipping our hair around our faces. We looked so happy, so carefree. Looking at that picture, you would never know what was coming. You would never know that in just a few short years, she wouldn't recognize me, would accuse me of terrible things, would die believing I had betrayed her. But that picture also reminded me of the truth. Before the disease, we had been happy. We had loved each other deeply. And that love, that bond, was real, even if the disease had tried to destroy it. I put the photo album away and pulled out my own journal, the one I had kept during the worst of it. I read through my entries, reliving those painful days. But this time, reading them didn't hurt as much. This time, I could see the story not just as a tragedy, but as a testament to love and perseverance. I had fought for my mother, even when she fought against me. I had made the hard choices, even when they broke my heart. I had stayed, even when it would have been easier to walk away. That meant something. That mattered. I started writing a new entry, the first one since her death. It's been a year since Mom died. A year since I've had to visit Meadowbrook, since I've had to watch her fade away a little more each day. A year since I've had to carry the weight of being responsible for someone who couldn't care for themselves. I thought I would feel relief. And I do, sometimes. Relief that she's not suffering anymore. Relief that I don't have to make impossible decisions anymore. Relief that I can live my own life again. But mostly, I just miss her. I miss the mother she was before Alzheimer's. I miss our morning coffee chats. I miss her laugh. I miss the way she would hug me, tight and warm and safe. The disease took so much from us. It took her memories, her personality, her ability to recognize the people she loved. It took years off her life. It took the peaceful retirement she had planned, the trips she wanted to take, the time she wanted to spend with family. But it didn't take everything. It didn't take the love that existed between us, even when she couldn't remember it. It didn't take the years of good memories we had built together. It didn't take the lessons she taught me, the values she instilled in me, the strength she gave me. I am who I am because of her. The good parts of me, the strong parts, the compassionate parts, those all came from her. And no disease can take that away. I'm learning to forgive myself for the things I couldn't control. For not being able to fix her. For not being able to make her understand that I loved her, even when she thought I was her enemy. For feeling relief when she died, even though I loved her desperately. I'm learning that grief is complicated, especially when the person you're grieving changed so much before they died. I'm grieving the mother I lost to Alzheimer's, but I'm also grieving the relationship we could have had if she had stayed healthy. I'm grieving the future we won't have together. But I'm also learning to celebrate what we did have. 32 years of love and laughter and ordinary moments that made up a life together. That's more than some people ever get. That's something to be grateful for. I closed the journal and set it aside. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. I went to the window and watched the colors shift and change, the day giving way to night. Tomorrow, I would wake up and continue building my life. I would go to work. I would see friends. I would volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association. I would slowly figure out who I was now, after everything that had happened. But tonight, I let myself simply be. I let myself feel the grief and the love and the complicated tangle of emotions that came with losing someone to a disease like Alzheimer's. I let myself remember both the good and the bad, the beautiful and the terrible. Because that's what life is. It's not just the happy moments or just the sad ones. It's all of it together, the joy and the pain, the love and the loss, the beginning and the end. And somehow, we find a way to carry it all, to keep moving forward even when it feels impossible. I thought about my mother's diary, still tucked away in the box of mementos. All those accusations, all that fear and confusion, written in her own hand. For so long, those words had haunted me, had made me question everything. But now I understood them differently. They weren't really about me at all. They were about a woman losing her grip on reality, trying desperately to make sense of a world that was slipping away from her. They were about fear and confusion and the desperate need to find someone to blame for what was happening. She had blamed me because I was there, because I was the closest person to her, because in her confused mind, I was the only explanation for all the strange things that were happening. It wasn't fair, but it also wasn't personal. It was just the disease, doing what the disease does. Understanding that didn't erase the pain of those months. It didn't undo the hurt of being accused of things I hadn't done, of being treated like an enemy by the person I loved most in the world. But it did make it possible to let go of the anger, to forgive her, to remember her with love instead of bitterness. And that, I realized, was the real lesson in all of this. Not everything is what it seems. My mother's accusations seemed like betrayal, but they were really symptoms of a disease. Her anger seemed like hatred, but it was really fear. Her rejection seemed like she didn't love me anymore, but really, she was just lost in a fog of confusion, unable to find her way back to the truth. The truth was that she had loved me. She had always loved me. Even when the disease made her forget my name, forget my face, forget our entire relationship, that love was still there somewhere, buried deep beneath the layers of damaged neurons and tangled proteins. I had to believe that. I had to believe that on some level, even at the very end, she knew she was loved. That she felt safe. That she wasn't alone. The sky outside had darkened completely now. Stars were beginning to appear, tiny points of light in the vast darkness. I watched them emerge, one by one, and I thought about how even in the darkest times, there is always light if you know where to look for it. For me, the light had been Patricia's support. The kindness of the staff at Meadowbrook. The understanding of my support group. The small moments of clarity when my mother seemed like herself again, even if just for a few minutes. The knowledge that I had done everything I could, that I had loved her to the very end. Those lights had been enough to guide me through the darkness. And now, on the other side, I could see that I had survived. I was changed, certainly. Scarred, definitely. But also stronger, more compassionate, more understanding of the complicated nature of love and loss. I would carry this experience with me for the rest of my life. It would shape how I saw the world, how I treated others, how I understood suffering and resilience. It would make me a better friend, a better volunteer, a better person. That was my mother's final gift to me, though she never knew she was giving it. Through her illness, through the terrible journey we took together, she taught me about the depths of love, about the strength required to care for someone who can't care for themselves, about the importance of forgiveness and compassion and holding on to hope even when everything seems hopeless. I walked away from the window and turned on a lamp. The warm light filled the room, pushing back the darkness. I picked up a book, one of my mother's favorites, and settled into her chair. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, lavender and something floral. I opened the book and began to read. The words were familiar. She had read this book to me when I was a child, and later, I had read it to her during her final months at Meadowbrook, hoping that somewhere in her failing mind, she might recognize the story, might find comfort in the familiar words. As I read, I felt her presence around me. Not in a supernatural way, but in the way that people we love stay with us even after they're gone. In the memories we carry. In the lessons they taught us. In the love that continues even when the person is no longer there to receive it. I read until my eyes grew heavy, until the words began to blur on the page. Then I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and went upstairs to bed. I fell asleep quickly, deeply, and for the first time in over a year, I didn't dream of hospitals or memory care facilities or my mother's confused, angry face. Instead, I dreamed of the beach, of that day captured in the photograph. My mother and I were walking along the shore, the waves lapping at our feet, the sun warm on our faces. We were laughing about something, I couldn't remember what, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that we were together, and we were happy, and in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. When I woke the next morning, I felt different. Lighter somehow. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it no longer felt like it was crushing me. I could breathe around it. I could live with it. I got up and went through my morning routine. Coffee. Shower. Getting dressed. Simple, ordinary things that felt almost miraculous in their normalcy. I had my whole day ahead of me, and I could fill it however I wanted. That freedom, after so many months of being tied to my mother's care, was both exhilarating and terrifying. I decided to spend the day doing something my mother would have loved. I drove to the nursery and bought flowers for the garden. Roses and lavender and daisies. I spent hours in the backyard, digging in the dirt, planting the flowers, pulling weeds, trimming back the overgrowth. The physical work felt good. The sun on my back, the smell of earth and growing things, the satisfaction of seeing the garden slowly transform from wild chaos to organized beauty. My mother had always said that gardening was therapeutic, that there was something healing about working with your hands, about nurturing life. She had been right. As I worked, I talked to her. I told her about the flowers I was planting, about how beautiful the garden was going to be. I told her about the support group, about the people I had met who understood what we had been through. I told her about my plans to continue volunteering, to help others navigate the impossible journey of Alzheimer's. I told her I forgave her for everything. For the accusations. For the anger. For not being able to fight the disease. I told her I understood that none of it was her fault, that she had been as much a victim of Alzheimer's as I had been. And I told her I was going to be okay. That I was finding my way forward. That I would carry her memory with me, not the confused, angry woman of her final years, but the strong, loving mother who had raised me and shaped me into who I was. By the time the sun began to set, the garden looked transformed. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own way. The flowers I had planted would bloom in the coming weeks, filling the space with color and life. It felt like a fitting tribute, a living memorial to a woman who had loved growing things. I stood back and surveyed my work, dirt under my fingernails, sweat on my brow, and I felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with the garden and everything to do with the journey I had taken to get here. I had survived the unsurvivable. I had loved someone through the worst thing that could happen to them. I had made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. I had watched someone I loved disappear and had found a way to keep loving them anyway. And now, I was learning to live again. To find joy in simple things. To build a future that honored the past without being trapped by it. To remember without drowning in grief. To love without fear of loss, because I had already lost everything and discovered that I could survive it. The next few months passed in a blur of healing and growth. I continued my therapy, continued my support group, continued my volunteer work. I started dating again, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during the worst of my mother's illness. I took a vacation, something I hadn't done in years. I also started writing. Not just journal entries, but a longer piece about my experience with my mother's Alzheimer's. I wrote about the diary, about the false accusations, about the heartbreak of watching someone you love become someone you don't recognize. I wrote about the guilt and the grief and the complicated nature of caregiving. I wrote about the lessons I had learned, about forgiveness and compassion and the importance of understanding that not everything is what it seems. I wrote about how my mother's accusations weren't really about me, but about a disease that was destroying her brain and her sense of reality. When I finished, I shared it with my support group. People cried. People thanked me for putting into words what they had felt but couldn't express. Several people asked if they could share it with their own family members to help them understand what they were going through. I realized that my experience, as painful as it had been, could help others. That by sharing my story, I could offer hope and understanding to people who were in the middle of their own nightmares, who felt alone and overwhelmed and guilty. I submitted the piece to a magazine that focused on caregiving and elder care. To my surprise, they accepted it. When it was published, I received dozens of emails from readers who said my story had helped them, had made them feel less alone, had given them permission to feel the complicated emotions that come with caring for someone with dementia. One email in particular stood out. It was from a woman whose mother had recently been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She wrote that she had been feeling angry and resentful about the diagnosis, about the burden of care that was falling on her shoulders. But reading my story had helped her understand that her mother's eventual decline wasn't about her, that the accusations and anger that might come were symptoms of a disease, not reflections of their relationship. "Thank you for sharing your story," she wrote. "You've helped me prepare for what's coming. You've helped me understand that I can love my mother through this, even when it's hard. Even when she doesn't remember who I am. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to survive this and come out the other side." Reading that email, I cried. But they were good tears, healing tears. My pain had meaning. My experience could help others. My mother's illness, as terrible as it had been, had taught me things that I could now share with the world. 2 years after my mother's death, I was invited to speak at an Alzheimer's Association conference. I stood in front of hundreds of people, caregivers, and medical professionals and researchers, and I told my story. I talked about the diary, about the accusations, about the journey from confusion to diagnosis to acceptance to loss. I talked about the importance of understanding that dementia patients often become paranoid and accusatory toward their primary caregivers. That this is a symptom of the disease, not a reflection of the relationship. That it's one of the cruelest aspects of Alzheimer's, turning the people we love into people who seem to hate us. But I also talked about hope. About the moments of clarity that can still happen. About the importance of holding on to the good memories, the real memories, not the false ones created by the disease. About the strength that comes from surviving something you thought would destroy you. When I finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. People came up to me afterward, shaking my hand, hugging me, thanking me for my honesty and my courage. Several people told me that my story had helped them understand their own experiences, had validated their feelings, had given them hope. One man, probably in his 60s, approached me with tears in his eyes. "My wife has Alzheimer's," he said. "She accuses me of cheating on her, of stealing from her, of trying to poison her. I know it's the disease, but it still hurts so much. Hearing your story, knowing that someone else has been through this and survived it, it helps. Thank you. I hugged him tight. You're going to get through this, I told him. It's going to be hard, maybe the hardest thing you ever do. But you're going to survive it. And on the other side, you'll find that the love you have for her is still there, stronger than ever, because it survived even this. He nodded, wiping his eyes. Thank you, he said again. Driving home that night, I thought about how far I had come. From the day I found my mother's diary, confused and hurt and desperate for answers, to now, standing in front of hundreds of people, sharing my story, offering hope and understanding. The journey had been brutal. It had broken me down and forced me to rebuild myself from scratch. But in the rebuilding, I had become someone stronger, someone more compassionate, someone who understood the complicated nature of love and loss in ways I never could have before. I thought about my mother, about the woman she had been and the woman the disease had turned her into. I thought about the diary, still tucked away in its box, a record of her fear and confusion. I thought about all the accusations, all the anger, all the pain. And I thought about forgiveness. Not just forgiving her, but forgiving myself. For not being able to fix her. For feeling relief when she died. For all the moments when I had been impatient or frustrated or angry. For being human in the face of an inhuman situation. I had done the best I could. That had to be enough. It was enough. When I got home, I went straight to the box where I kept my mother's mementos. I pulled out the diary and held it in my hands. For so long, this book had represented pain and betrayal. But now, I could see it differently. Now, it was a record of a woman fighting against a disease that was destroying her mind. A woman who was scared and confused and trying desperately to make sense of a world that no longer made sense. I opened it to that last entry, the one where she had written about being scared, about knowing something was wrong, about being terrified of losing herself and losing me. I read those words again, and this time, they didn't make me cry. This time, they filled me with a deep sense of compassion and love. My mother had been brave. Even in the face of a disease that was stealing everything from her, she had tried to hold on. She had tried to make sense of things. She had tried to protect herself, even if her methods were misguided and hurtful. She had been human. Flawed and scared and doing the best she could with a brain that was betraying her. I could forgive that. I could love her for that. I closed the diary and put it back in the box. But this time, I also added something new. I wrote a letter to my mother, telling her everything I wished I could have said when she was alive. I told her I understood. I told her I forgave her. I told her I loved her, had always loved her, would always love her. I told her that her illness had taught me things I never would have learned otherwise. About strength and resilience and the depths of love. About forgiveness and compassion and the importance of holding on even when everything seems hopeless. I told her that I was okay. That I had survived. That I was building a good life, a meaningful life, a life that honored her memory. I told her thank you. For raising me. For loving me. For teaching me, even in her illness, even in her final terrible months, lessons that would shape the rest of my life. I folded the letter and placed it in the box with the diary and the photos and all the other mementos. Then I closed the box and put it away. It was time to move forward. Not to forget, never to forget, but to carry the memories and the lessons with me as I built my future. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose. I had been thinking about selling the house, about starting fresh somewhere new. But now, I realized I didn't want to leave. This house held too many good memories. Yes, it also held painful ones, but the good outweighed the bad. Instead of selling, I decided to make it truly mine. I repainted the walls in colors I loved. I rearranged the furniture. I turned my mother's bedroom into a home office where I could write and work on my advocacy projects. I kept some of her things, the pieces that brought me joy and comfort, and donated the rest. Slowly, the house transformed. It was still the home I had grown up in, still filled with memories of my mother, but it was also becoming my space, a reflection of who I was now, not just who I had been. I planted more flowers in the garden. I hosted dinners for friends. I filled the house with laughter and life. And sometimes, when I was sitting in the living room or cooking in the kitchen, I would feel my mother's presence, not as a ghost but as a warm memory, a gentle reminder of where I came from and who had shaped me. 3 years after her death, I met someone. His name was David, and he was kind and patient and understanding. On our third date, I told him about my mother, about the Alzheimer's, about the diary and the accusations and the terrible journey we had taken together. I expected him to be scared off. It was a lot of baggage to carry. But instead, he took my hand and said, "That must have been incredibly hard. I'm sorry you had to go through that. But I'm also impressed by your strength. Not everyone could have done what you did." His words, his acceptance, his understanding, meant more to me than I could express. For the first time since my mother's diagnosis, I felt like I could have a future that wasn't defined by loss and grief. I could have love and happiness and all the normal things I had thought were lost to me forever. David and I took things slowly. He understood that I needed time, that I was still healing. He was patient when I had bad days, when the grief would hit me out of nowhere and I would need to cry or be alone. He listened when I needed to talk about my mother, about the good times and the bad times and everything in between. A year later, he proposed. We were in the garden, surrounded by the flowers I had planted in my mother's memory. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. He got down on one knee and asked me to marry him, and I said yes without hesitation. We got married in the backyard, under an arch covered in roses and lavender. Patricia was there, and David's family, and friends who had supported me through the darkest times. It was a small ceremony, intimate and meaningful. As I stood there, saying my vows, I thought about my mother. I wished she could have been there. I wished she could have met David, could have seen me happy and in love. But I also felt her presence, felt her approval, felt her love surrounding me. In my vows, I talked about what my mother had taught me about love. That real love isn't just about the easy times, the happy moments, the joy and laughter. Real love is also about showing up when things are hard. About making difficult choices. About staying even when it would be easier to leave. About forgiving and being forgiven. About holding on to hope even in the darkest times. My mother taught me all of that, I said. Not through words, but through the journey we took together at the end of her life. She taught me what it means to love someone unconditionally, even when they can't love you back. Even when they don't remember who you are. Even when they accuse you of terrible things. That's the kind of love I want to bring to this marriage. That's the kind of love I promise to give you. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. After the wedding, David and I settled into married life. We talked about the future, about our dreams and goals. We talked about children, about whether we wanted them, about the fear I carried of potentially developing Alzheimer's myself someday. There's a genetic component, I told him. I could have inherited the genes that made my mother susceptible. I could end up just like her. David took my hand. If that happens, he said, we'll face it together. Just like you faced it with your mother. I'm not going anywhere. His words gave me courage. I decided to get genetic testing to find out if I carried the genes associated with early onset Alzheimer's. The waiting period for the results was agonizing. I swung between hope and despair, between wanting to know and wishing I had never asked. When the results finally came, I sat in the doctor's office with David beside me, holding my hand. The doctor explained that I did carry one of the genes associated with increased risk, but that it wasn't a guarantee. Many people with the gene never develop Alzheimer's. And even if I did, it might not happen until I was very old. There are things you can do to reduce your risk, the doctor said. Stay mentally active. Exercise regularly. Eat a healthy diet. Manage stress. Stay socially connected. These things can't prevent Alzheimer's entirely, but they can help. I left the doctor's office feeling strangely relieved. Yes, I had an increased risk. But I also had knowledge. I had time. I had the ability to make choices that might protect my brain health. And I had David, who had promised to face whatever came with me. I threw myself into brain-healthy living. I took up new hobbies that challenged my mind. I learned to play the piano. I started doing crossword puzzles and learning new languages. I exercised every day. I ate foods rich in omega-3 fatty acids and antioxidants. I meditated to manage stress. But I also lived. I didn't let the fear of what might happen someday stop me from enjoying what was happening now. I traveled with David. I spent time with friends. I continued my advocacy work with the Alzheimer's Association. I wrote more articles about caregiving and dementia. I spoke at more conferences. I lived fully and joyfully, honoring my mother's memory by making the most of every day I had. 5 years after my mother's death, David and I decided to have a child. It was a difficult decision. I worried about passing on the genetic risk. I worried about potentially developing Alzheimer's while my child was still young. But I also wanted to experience motherhood, wanted to pass on the love and lessons my mother had given me. Our daughter was born on a warm spring day. We named her Eleanor, after my mother. When I held her for the first time, I felt an overwhelming rush of love and fear and hope. I looked at her tiny face, her perfect little fingers, and I made a promise. I promised to love her unconditionally. To be present for her. To teach her the things my mother had taught me. And if the worst happened, if I did develop Alzheimer's, I promised to document everything now, while I still could. To write down my memories, my love, my hopes for her future. So that even if I forgot, she would always know how much she was loved. I started writing letters to Eleanor, one for each year of her life. Letters she could read when she was older. Letters that would tell her who I was, what I believed in, what I hoped for her. Letters that would exist even if my memory didn't. I also started a video diary, recording myself talking about my life, my experiences, my love for her and David. I wanted her to be able to see me, hear my voice, know me as I really was, not as I might become if Alzheimer's took me. But mostly, I focused on being present. On enjoying every moment with my daughter. on watching her grow and learn and become her own person, on being the mother to her that my mother had been to me before the disease. Eleanor grew into a bright, curious, loving child. She had my mother's green eyes and her infectious laugh. Watching her, I saw echoes of my mother, and it brought me both joy and sadness. Joy because it felt like my mother lived on in some way. Sadness because my mother would never meet her namesake, would never hold her or read to her or spoil her the way grandmothers do. But I told Eleanor stories about her grandmother, about the woman she had been before Alzheimer's, about her strength and kindness and love. I showed Eleanor pictures, read her the letters my mother had written to me over the years. I made sure Eleanor knew where she came from, knew the legacy of love that had been passed down through generations. When Eleanor was 5 years old, she asked me about the box I kept in my closet, the one with my mother's mementos. I had been waiting for this question, preparing for it. I sat down with her and opened the box. I showed her the photos, told her stories about each one. I showed her my mother's recipe cards, promised to teach her to make her great-grandmother's chocolate cake. I showed her the letters my mother had written to me. And then I showed her the diary. Eleanor was too young to read it herself, too young to understand the full weight of what it contained. But I explained it to her in simple terms. Your grandmother got very sick, I said. Her brain stopped working the way it should. She forgot things. She got confused. She said things that weren't true because her brain was telling her things that weren't real. Did it hurt? Eleanor asked. Yes, I said. It hurt her, and it hurt me. But I never stopped loving her, and she never stopped loving me, even when she couldn't remember who I was. That's sad, Eleanor said. It is sad, I agreed. But it also taught me important things. It taught me that love is stronger than sickness. That we can survive hard things. That we should be kind to people who are struggling, because we don't always know what they're going through. Eleanor thought about this for a moment. Then she said, I love you, Mommy. I love you too, baby, I said, pulling her close. So much. As Eleanor grew older, I continued to share more of the story with her. I wanted her to understand not just the happy memories, but the difficult ones too. I wanted her to know that life isn't always easy, that sometimes the people we love get sick, that sometimes we have to make hard choices. But I also wanted her to know that we can survive those hard times. That we can find meaning in suffering. That we can turn pain into purpose. When Eleanor was 10, I took her with me to speak at an Alzheimer's Association event. She sat in the front row, watching as I told my story. Afterward, she hugged me tight. You're brave, Mommy, she said. I'm not brave, I said. I just did what I had to do. That's what brave means, she said. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. My daughter, at 10 years old, understood something it had taken me years to learn. That bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you are scared. 10 years after my mother's death, I received an email from a researcher studying Alzheimer's disease. She had read my articles, heard me speak at conferences, and wanted to interview me for a study she was conducting on the experiences of family caregivers. I agreed, and we spent several hours talking about my experience. About the diary. About the accusations. About the emotional toll of caring for someone with dementia. About the guilt and grief and complicated feelings that come with the territory. At the end of the interview, the researcher said something that struck me. Your story is important, she said. Not just for other caregivers, but for researchers like me. We focus so much on the medical aspects of Alzheimer's, on the biology and the treatments. But we sometimes forget about the human cost. About what this disease does to families. Your story reminds us why this work matters. Why we need to find better treatments, better support systems, ultimately a cure. Her words gave me hope. Hope that my mother's suffering, and mine, might contribute in some small way to helping others. That our story might inspire research that could prevent other families from going through what we went through. I continued my advocacy work with renewed purpose. I lobbied for increased funding for Alzheimer's research. I pushed for better support services for caregivers. I shared my story again and again, in articles and speeches and interviews, because I believed that stories have power. That by sharing our experiences, we can change hearts and minds and policies. 15 years after my mother's death, I stood in the garden she had loved, now maintained by me and occasionally helped by Eleanor, who had inherited her great-grandmother's green thumb. The roses were in full bloom, their scent heavy in the warm summer air. Bees buzzed lazily from flower to flower. Birds sang in the trees. I thought about the journey I had taken. From the day I found the diary, confused and hurt, to now, standing in this garden, at peace with the past and hopeful about the future. The pain of those years would never completely go away. There would always be a scar, a tender place in my heart where my mother used to be. But the wound had healed. I could think about her now without being overwhelmed by grief. I could remember the good times without being haunted by the bad times. I had learned that not everything is what it seems. That accusations can be symptoms. That anger can be fear. That rejection can be confusion. That sometimes, the people who seem to hate us are really just lost and scared and fighting a battle we can't see. I had learned about forgiveness. About letting go of hurt and anger. About understanding that people are doing the best they can with what they have, even when their best isn't very good. I had learned about love. Real, deep, unconditional love. The kind of love that stays even when it's not returned. The kind of love that makes hard choices and lives with the consequences. The kind of love that survives even death. And I had learned about resilience. About the human capacity to survive things that seem unsurvivable. About the strength we don't know we have until we're forced to use it. About the ability to rebuild ourselves after being broken down. These lessons, learned through pain and loss, had shaped who I was. They had made me a better person, a better spouse, a better mother. They had given me purpose and meaning. They had turned my suffering into something that could help others. My mother's Alzheimer's had taken so much from us. But in a strange way, it had also given me gifts. The gift of understanding. The gift of compassion. The gift of knowing what really matters in life. The gift of appreciating every moment, every memory, every connection, because I knew how quickly it could all be taken away. I heard the back door open and turned to see David and Eleanor coming out to join me. Eleanor, now 15 and beautiful and full of life, ran over and hugged me. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" she asked. "Your grandmother," I said. "And how much she would have loved you." "Tell me a story about her," Eleanor said. She never tired of hearing stories about the grandmother she had never met. So I told her a story. Not about the diary or the accusations or the terrible final years. but about the time my mother and I went camping and got lost in the woods and had to navigate our way back using the stars. About how my mother had stayed calm and confident, had turned a scary situation into an adventure, had taught me that getting lost is sometimes the best way to find yourself. Eleanor listened, her green eyes, so like my mother's, bright with interest. When I finished, she said, "I wish I could have met her." "Me too," I said. "But you know her through the stories. Through the recipes we make together. Through the garden we tend. Through the values she passed down to me and I'm passing down to you. She's still here, and all of those things." David put his arm around me. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm good," I said. And I meant it. I was good. Not perfect, not without scars, but good. Healed. Whole. At peace. We stood together in the garden, the three of us, surrounded by flowers and birdsong and the warm summer air. This was my family. This was my life. Built on the foundation my mother had given me, shaped by the lessons her illness had taught me, moving forward into a future that honored the past without being trapped by it. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I thought about my mother, about the diary she had kept, about all the false accusations and the real fear behind them. I thought about the journey we had taken together, the pain and the love and the impossible choices. And I thought about forgiveness. Not just forgiving her, but forgiving myself. For not being perfect. For not being able to save her. For being human in the face of an inhuman disease. I had done the best I could. I had loved her to the end. I had stayed when it would have been easier to leave. I had made the hard choices. I had survived. That was enough. It had to be enough. It was enough. As darkness fell, we went inside together. I made dinner using one of my mother's recipes. We ate together, laughing and talking, making new memories. And later, after Eleanor had gone to bed, I sat with David on the couch, his arm around me, and I felt grateful. Grateful for the years I had with my mother before the disease. Grateful for the lessons I learned during her illness. Grateful for the family I had built. Grateful for the opportunity to turn my pain into purpose, to help others who were walking the same difficult path I had walked. Grateful for every moment, every breath, every chance to love and be loved. Life is complicated. It's messy and painful and beautiful all at once. It gives us joy and takes it away. It breaks us down and forces us to rebuild. It teaches us lessons we never wanted to learn. But it also gives us chances. Chances to love deeply. Chances to forgive. Chances to grow and change and become better versions of ourselves. Chances to turn our suffering into something meaningful. My mother's Alzheimer's was a tragedy. There's no other word for it. It stole her from me long before she died. It turned our final years together into a nightmare of confusion and accusations and heartbreak. But it also taught me things I needed to know. About love and loss. About strength and resilience. About forgiveness and compassion. About the importance of being present, of cherishing every moment, of not taking anything for granted. These lessons have shaped my life in profound ways. They've made me who I am. And while I would give anything to have my mother back, healthy and whole, I can't deny that the journey we took together, as painful as it was, had meaning and purpose. Not everything is what it seems. My mother's accusations weren't really about me. They were about a disease that was destroying her brain. Her anger wasn't hatred. It was fear. Her rejection wasn't a reflection of our relationship. It was a symptom of her illness. Understanding this didn't make the pain go away. But it did make it possible to forgive, to let go, to remember her with love instead of bitterness. And that, in the end, is what matters. Not the accusations or the anger or the terrible final years. But the love. The love that existed before the disease. The love that survived the disease. The love that continues even now, years after her death. That love is what I carry with me. That love is what I pass on to my daughter. That love is what gives meaning to the suffering, what makes the journey worthwhile. I still have the diary. I probably always will. But I don't read it anymore. I don't need to. I've made peace with what it represents. I've forgiven my mother for the words she wrote. I've forgiven myself for not being able to fix her. Instead, I focus on the other mementos in the box. The photos of happy times. The letters full of love and encouragement. The recipe cards stained with use. These are the things that represent who my mother really was. These are the things I want to remember. 20 years after my mother's death, I received news that a new treatment for Alzheimer's had been approved. It wasn't a cure, but it was progress. It could slow the progression of the disease, give patients more time with their families, more time being themselves. I cried when I heard the news. Tears of joy for the families who would benefit from this treatment. Tears of sadness that it had come too late for my mother. Tears of hope that maybe, someday, there would be a cure. That maybe, if I did develop Alzheimer's, there would be treatments available that could help me. I thought about all the researchers working tirelessly to understand this disease. All the caregivers sharing their stories. All the advocates pushing for funding and support. We were all part of something bigger than ourselves. We were all fighting the same fight. And slowly, we were making progress. I continued my advocacy work, now with renewed hope. I spoke at fundraisers for Alzheimer's research. I shared my story with medical students, helping them understand the human side of the disease they were learning to treat. I mentored new caregivers, offering support and understanding and hope. My mother's suffering had not been in vain. It had taught me. It had changed me. And through me, it was helping others. Eleanor grew up and went to college, studying neuroscience. She told me she wanted to understand the brain, wanted to contribute to finding better treatments for diseases like Alzheimer's. I was so proud of her, so grateful that she had taken the legacy of her grandmother's illness and turned it into purpose. When Eleanor left for college, I felt the empty nest syndrome that all parents feel. But I also felt proud. I had raised a strong, compassionate, purposeful young woman. I had passed on the lessons my mother had taught me. The cycle continued. David and I settled into this new phase of life. We traveled more. We spent time with friends. We enjoyed the freedom that comes when your children are grown. But we also stayed connected to Eleanor, talking regularly, visiting when we could. And I continued to monitor my own brain health. I stayed mentally active, physically active, socially connected. I did everything I could to reduce my risk. But I also tried not to live in fear. I tried to enjoy each day, to be present, to appreciate the life I had built. Because that's what my mother would have wanted. Not for me to spend my life terrified of developing the disease that took her. But for me to live fully, joyfully, purposefully. to make the most of every moment, to love deeply and forgive freely and find meaning in both the joy and the suffering. 25 years after my mother's death, I stood at her grave. It was the anniversary of her passing, and I had come alone to pay my respects. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful. Birds sang in the trees. The sun was warm on my face. I knelt down and placed fresh flowers on her grave. Roses and lavender, her favorites. I traced my fingers over her name on the headstone. Eleanor Marie Harrison. Beloved mother and grandmother. "Hi, Mom," I said softly. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately. About everything we went through. About the diary and the accusations and how hard those final years were." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "I want you to know that I understand now. I understand that you were scared and confused. That your brain was betraying you. That the things you said and did weren't really you. They were the disease. I want you to know that I forgive you. For everything. And I hope, wherever you are, that you've forgiven yourself too. I want you to know that I'm okay. More than okay. I'm happy. I have a wonderful husband and a beautiful daughter who carries your name and your spirit. I have meaningful work that helps others. I have a good life, a life built on the foundation you gave me. I want you to know that you were a good mother. Not perfect, but good. You loved me and raised me and taught me important things. And even in your illness, even in those terrible final years, you taught me lessons I needed to learn. I want you to know that I love you. I always have. I always will. Nothing, not even Alzheimer's, could change that. I sat there for a long time, feeling the sun on my face, listening to the birds, feeling connected to my mother in a way I hadn't felt in years. Not the confused, angry woman of her final years, but the strong, loving woman who had raised me. When I finally stood to leave, I felt lighter. The weight I had been carrying for so long, the weight of grief and guilt and unresolved pain, had lifted. Not completely, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to move forward. Enough to live. I drove home through familiar streets, past the house where I had grown up, past the park where my mother used to take me to feed the ducks, past all the landmarks of my childhood. So much had changed. So much had stayed the same. When I got home, David was in the kitchen making dinner. He looked up when I entered and smiled. "How was your visit?" he asked. "Good," I said. "Really good. I feel like I finally made peace with everything." He came over and hugged me. "I'm glad," he said. That evening, Eleanor called. She was excited about her research, about a project she was working on that might lead to earlier detection of Alzheimer's. She talked rapidly, her enthusiasm infectious, and I listened with pride and joy. When she finished, I said, "Your grandmother would be so proud of you. Taking something so painful and turning it into something that could help people. That's exactly the kind of person she was." "I learned it from you, Mom," Eleanor said. "You showed me how to do that." After we hung up, I sat with David on the couch, his arm around me, and I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was my life. Built from the ashes of loss and grief. Shaped by pain and love in equal measure. Moving forward while honoring the past. Not everything is what it seems. That lesson, learned through my mother's diary and her illness, had become the guiding principle of my life. It had taught me to look deeper, to seek understanding, to offer compassion even when it's hard. It had taught me that accusations can be symptoms, that anger can be fear, that rejection can be confusion, that sometimes the people who hurt us are really just hurting themselves. It had taught me about forgiveness, about letting go of hurt and anger, about understanding that people are doing the best they can with what they have. It had taught me about love, real, deep, unconditional love, the kind that stays even when it's not returned, the kind that makes hard choices and lives with the consequences, the kind that survives even death. And it had taught me about resilience, about the human capacity to survive things that seem unsurvivable, about finding meaning in suffering, about turning pain into purpose. These lessons, learned at such a high cost, had become the foundation of who I was. They had shaped my relationships, my work, my understanding of the world. They had made me a better person. And for that, despite everything, I was grateful. 30 years after my mother's death, I received an award from the Alzheimer's Association for my decades of advocacy work. I stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people, holding the plaque, and I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the day I found the diary, confused and hurt, to this moment, being honored for turning that pain into purpose. It had been a long road, a hard road, but a meaningful one. In my acceptance speech, I talked about my mother, about the woman she had been and the woman the disease had turned her into, about the diary full of false accusations, about the heartbreak of watching someone you love disappear. But I also talked about hope, about the progress that had been made in understanding and treating Alzheimer's, about the researchers working tirelessly to find a cure, about the caregivers who show up every day, loving people who can't always love them back. And I talked about love, about how love is stronger than disease, about how love survives even when memory doesn't, about how love gives us the strength to face impossible situations and make it through to the other side. My mother taught me about love, I said. Not through words, but through the journey we took together. She taught me that real love isn't just about the easy times. It's about showing up when things are hard. It's about staying even when you want to run. It's about forgiving even when it hurts. It's about holding on to hope even in the darkest times. That's the legacy she left me. And that's the legacy I hope to leave for others. That no matter how hard things get, no matter how much we suffer, love is always worth it. Love is always enough. The audience gave me a standing ovation. People came up to me afterward, shaking my hand, hugging me, thanking me for my work and my words. Many of them were caregivers themselves, walking the same difficult path I had walked. Many of them had tears in their eyes. One woman, probably in her 40s, approached me. She was crying. "My mother has Alzheimer's," she said. "She keeps a diary too. She writes terrible things about me. Things that aren't true. I found it last week, and I've been devastated. But hearing your story, knowing that someone else went through this and survived it, it helps. Thank you." I hugged her tight. "You're going to get through this," I told her. "It's going to be hard. It's going to hurt. But you're going to survive. And on the other side, you'll find that the love you have for your mother is still there, stronger than ever." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Driving home that night, I thought about that woman. About all the people out there going through what I had gone through. About how my story, my mother's story, could help them feel less alone. That was why I kept sharing my story, even after all these years. Because stories have power. They connect us. They help us understand that we're not alone in our suffering. They give us hope that we can survive. When I got home, David and Eleanor were waiting for me. Eleanor had flown in to surprise me, to be there for the award ceremony. They had champagne and flowers and huge smiles. "We're so proud of you, Mom," Eleanor said, hugging me tight. We celebrated together, the three of us, toasting to the past and the future, to loss and love, to pain and purpose. And I felt, in that moment, completely at peace. I had survived the unsurvivable. I had loved through the unlovable. I had found meaning in suffering. I had turned my pain into purpose. And I had built a good life. A life filled with love and meaning and connection. A life that honored my mother's memory while also moving forward into the future. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I went to my office and pulled out the box of mementos. I opened it and looked at the contents. The photos. The letters. The recipe cards. And the diary. I picked up the diary and held it in my hands. For so long, this book had represented pain and betrayal. But now, I could see it differently. Now, it was a record of a woman fighting against a disease that was destroying her mind. A woman who was scared and confused and trying desperately to make sense of a world that no longer made sense. I opened it to that last entry, the one where she had written about being scared, about knowing something was wrong. I read those words one more time. I'm scared. I know something is wrong with me. I'm so scared of losing myself. I'm so scared of losing her. I closed the diary and held it against my chest. I'm here, Mom, I whispered. You didn't lose me. I'm still here. And I still love you. I put the diary back in the box and closed it. Then I went to bed, crawling in next to David, who wrapped his arms around me. I love you, he murmured sleepily. I love you too, I said. And I fell asleep feeling grateful. Grateful for the life I had built. Grateful for the lessons I had learned. Grateful for the love that had carried me through the darkest times and brought me to this place of peace and purpose. Not everything is what it seems. My mother's accusations weren't really about me. They were symptoms of a disease. Her anger wasn't hatred. It was fear. Her rejection wasn't a reflection of our relationship. It was confusion. Understanding this had set me free. Free from the hurt and anger. Free from the guilt and shame. Free to remember her with love. Free to honor her memory by living fully and purposefully. That was the gift she had given me, though she never knew it. Through her illness, through the terrible journey we took together, she had taught me the most important lessons of my life. About love. About forgiveness. About resilience. About finding meaning in suffering. About turning pain into purpose. These lessons had shaped who I was. They had made me a better person. They had given my life meaning and direction. And for that, despite everything, I was grateful. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the window. I could hear David in the kitchen, making coffee. I could hear Eleanor's voice, laughing at something he said. I could smell bacon cooking, hear the sizzle of it in the pan. I lay there for a moment, just listening, just being present. This was my life. This was what I had built from the ashes of loss and grief. This was what love looked like, what resilience looked like, what healing looked like. I got up and joined my family in the kitchen. We ate breakfast together, talking and laughing, making plans for the day. Ordinary moments. Simple moments. But also precious moments, because I knew how quickly they could be taken away. After breakfast, Eleanor and I went for a walk. We ended up at the cemetery, standing at my mother's grave. Eleanor placed flowers next to the ones I had left the day before. "Tell me about her," Eleanor said. "Not the sad parts. Tell me about who she really was." So I told her stories. About my mother's laugh, which was loud and infectious. About her terrible singing voice, which never stopped her from singing anyway. About her love of gardening and cooking and reading. About her strength and kindness and the way she always made me feel loved and valued. I told Eleanor about the time my mother stayed up all night helping me finish a school project I had procrastinated on. About the time she drove through a blizzard to bring me soup when I was sick at college. About the time she stood up to a teacher who was treating me unfairly. I told her about all the ordinary moments that made up a life of love. The morning coffee chats. The shared meals. The inside jokes. The comfortable silences. All the little things that you don't appreciate until they're gone. "She sounds amazing," Eleanor said. "She was," I said. "She really was." We stood there together, grandmother and granddaughter connected by love and memory and the lessons passed down through generations. And I felt my mother's presence, not as a ghost but as a living legacy, continuing through me and through Eleanor. As we walked back to the car, Eleanor said, "Mom, I want you to know something. If you ever get sick like Grandma did, I'll be there for you. Just like you were there for her." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "I hope it never comes to that," I said. "But if it does, I know I'll be in good hands." We drove home together, and I felt a deep sense of peace. The cycle continued. The love continued. The lessons continued. And that was enough. That was everything. Years passed. I grew older. My hair turned gray. My body slowed down. But my mind stayed sharp, and for that I was grateful every single day. The genetic risk I carried never manifested. I was one of the lucky ones. I continued my advocacy work, though at a slower pace. I continued to share my story, to mentor caregivers, to push for better treatments and support systems. I continued to honor my mother's memory by turning our pain into purpose. Eleanor finished her doctorate and became a researcher, working on early detection methods for Alzheimer's. She published papers, gave presentations, made contributions to the field. And I watched with pride, knowing that my mother's legacy lived on through her work. David and I grew old together. We traveled. We spent time with friends and family. We enjoyed our grandchildren, Eleanor's children, who carried forward the legacy of love and resilience that had been passed down through generations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, I would sit in the garden and think about my mother. About the diary she had kept. About the accusations that had hurt so much. About the journey we had taken together. And I would feel grateful. Grateful for the years we had before the disease. Grateful for the lessons I learned during her illness. Grateful for the life I had built. Grateful for the love that had carried me through. Not everything is what it seems. That lesson, learned through so much pain, had become the foundation of my life. It had taught me to look deeper, to seek understanding, to offer compassion. It had taught me about forgiveness and love and the strength of the human spirit. And it had taught me that even in the darkest times, even when everything seems hopeless, there is always light if you know where to look for it. There is always love. There is always hope. There is always a way forward. My mother's Alzheimer's had taken so much from us. But it had also given us gifts. The gift of understanding. The gift of compassion. The gift of knowing what really matters. The gift of appreciating every moment, because we knew how quickly it could all be taken away. These gifts, born from suffering, had shaped my life in profound ways. They had made me who I was. They had given my life meaning and purpose. They had taught me how to love deeply, forgive freely, and find hope even in the darkest times. And for that, despite everything, I was grateful. As the sun set on another day, I sat in the garden surrounded by roses and lavender, the flowers my mother had loved. The air was warm and fragrant. Birds sang their evening songs. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink. I thought about the journey I had taken. From the day I found the diary to this moment, sitting in peace in the garden. It had been a long road. A hard road. But a meaningful one. I had survived. I had loved. I had forgiven. I had found meaning in suffering. I had turned pain into purpose. I had built a good life, a life that honored my mother's memory while also moving forward into the future. And I had learned the most important lesson of all. That not everything is what it seems. That accusations can be symptoms. That anger can be fear. That rejection can be confusion. That sometimes, the people who hurt us are really just hurting themselves. That love is stronger than disease. That forgiveness is possible even when it seems impossible. That we can survive things we thought would destroy us. That we can find meaning in suffering. That we can turn pain into purpose. These lessons, learned at such a high cost, had become my greatest treasures. They had shaped who I was. They had given my life direction and meaning. They had made me a better person. And they had taught me how to live. How to love deeply. How to forgive freely. How to find hope in the darkest times. How to appreciate every moment. How to turn suffering into something meaningful. My mother had given me these gifts, though she never knew it. Through her illness, through the terrible journey we took together, she had taught me the most important lessons of my life. And for that, I would be forever grateful. As darkness fell, I went inside. David was waiting for me, a warm smile on his face. We had dinner together, just the two of us, talking and laughing, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. Later, as I was getting ready for bed, I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw the lines on my face, the gray in my hair, the marks of a life well lived. I saw strength and resilience and compassion. I saw someone who had survived the unsurvivable and come out the other side stronger. I saw my mother's daughter, carrying her legacy, honoring her memory, living the life she would have wanted me to live. And I smiled. Because despite everything, despite all the pain and loss and heartbreak, I had made it. I had survived. I had built a good life. I had found meaning and purpose. I had loved and been loved. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. I climbed into bed next to David, who wrapped his arms around me. I closed my eyes and felt grateful. Grateful for this moment. Grateful for this life. Grateful for the journey that had brought me here. Grateful for my mother, who had given me so much. Who had loved me and raised me and taught me, even in her illness, lessons I needed to learn. Grateful for the understanding that not everything is what it seems. That beneath the surface of anger and accusations and rejection, there is often fear and confusion and pain. That compassion and forgiveness are always possible, even when they seem impossible. Grateful for the love that had carried me through the darkest times. The love of family and friends. The love I had for my mother, which had survived even her illness. The love that continued even now, years after her death. Grateful for the strength I had discovered in myself. The resilience. The ability to survive things I thought would destroy me. The capacity to turn pain into purpose, to find meaning in suffering. Grateful for every moment, every breath, every chance to love and be loved. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about my mother one last time. Not the confused, angry woman of her final years, but the strong, loving woman who had raised me. The woman who had taught me about love and strength and resilience. The woman whose legacy lived on through me and through Eleanor and through all the people our story had helped. I love you, Mom, I whispered into the darkness. Thank you for everything. Thank you for the good years. Thank you for the hard lessons. Thank you for teaching me about love and forgiveness and strength. Thank you for being my mother. And in the quiet of the night, surrounded by love and peace and gratitude, I felt her presence one last time. Not as a ghost, but as a warm feeling in my heart. A sense of connection that transcended death and disease and all the pain we had endured. She was still with me. She would always be with me. In my memories. In my values. In the lessons she had taught me. And the love that continued even after she was gone. And that was enough. That was everything. I fell asleep with a smile on my face, at peace with the past, grateful for the present, hopeful for the future. I had survived the journey. I had learned the lessons. I had found meaning in the suffering. And I had discovered that love, real love, is stronger than anything. Stronger than disease. Stronger than death. Stronger than all the pain and loss and heartbreak life can throw at us. That was my mother's final gift to me. That was the legacy she left behind. And that was the truth I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Not everything is what it seems. But love, real love, is always what it seems. It's always there, even when we can't see it. It's always strong, even when it feels weak. It's always enough, even when it seems like it's not. Love is always enough. And with that thought, I drifted into a peaceful sleep, surrounded by the love of my family, carrying the memory of my mother in my heart, grateful for every moment of this beautiful, complicated, painful, joyful life.